The clock on the kitchen wall read 9:40 p.m., soft ticking, barely audible above the quiet hum of the refrigerator. A single warm light glowed above the sink, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Outside, Los Angeles murmured gently. In the distance, traffic, rolling somewhere far off, a dog barking once, then silence again. Inside, everything was still.
Almost sacred.
Keanu Reeves moved slowly around his small kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. The countertop was covered with folded blankets, sealed cans of soup and beans, small bundles of toiletries, and hand-packed medical kits. Everything was arranged with precision, nothing thrown together in haste. Each item had its place, and each box had a name. He reached for a thick, gray blanket and gently rolled it tight, wrapping a piece of twine around it, then setting it into a brown cardboard box already half filled with food and a hygiene kit. His fingers paused for a moment before lifting a note from the table, a small, creased piece of paper written in his own slanted handwriting. "Harold, stay strong. You are not forgotten." He read it once more in silence before folding it and tucking it inside the box. His hand lingered on the lid, pressing it down slowly, as if sealing in a promise. There were 6 boxes already packed. 6 names. 6 lives. All scattered across the city's forgotten corners. People he had come to know not just by circumstance, but by story. Harold, the veteran who parked near an abandoned park and always tried to make others laugh. Maria, a mother with 2 children who slept beneath a freeway underpass and never asked for more than what she needed. Thomas, who had once been a high school teacher before a house fire left him with nothing. Keanu remembered every detail. This wasn't a performance. There were no cameras, no charity, gala, or social media hashtags. This was his own rhythm, his own way of staying grounded in a world that often felt too far removed from the people who needed help most. He didn't speak aloud. There was no need. The silence had become his partner in this ritual. It started almost a year ago, after a chance encounter with a man sitting on the curb outside a gas station. They talked about pain, about loss, about what it meant to be seen. That conversation had stayed with Keanu long after the man disappeared into the night. And from that moment on, this quiet mission had become a part of him. Tonight, though something felt different, his hand hovered over the final package, eyes narrowing ever so slightly as he caught his own reflection in the dark kitchen window. There was nothing there, just his own tired face, but still the feeling lingered, a pressure behind the calm, a sensation that something unseen had shifted. He turned back to the list beside him, checked off the final name, then sealed the box. His handwriting was steady, the ink slightly smudged at the corners from handling. For Harold, stay strong. He stood still for a moment, eyes resting on the boxes. 6 quiet declarations of care, wrapped in cardboard and carried by hope. He exhaled softly, almost like a prayer. Then, without a word, he began to carry them one by one to the garage, where his unmarked black SUV waited beneath dim overhead lights. The vehicle was plain, nondescript, deliberately chosen. No one would think twice about it passing through the city at night. That was the point. As he opened the back door, a faint breeze brushed against his arm, cool and subtle. As if the night itself had stirred, he loaded the boxes with care, adjusting each one until it was snug and secure. The last box, Harold's, went on top. He stood back, staring at it for a long moment. His jaw tightened. There was something in the air tonight. Not just wind, not just nerves. It was the feeling of eyes unseen. It was a fate tightening the thread. But Keanu, ever quiet in his strength, said nothing. He simply closed the door, stepped into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine purred to life. ChatGPT said. The SUV rolled slowly down the dim streets, headlights cutting a gentle path through patches of fog that had begun to settle low over the city. Keanu kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the list of names he had scribbled on a folded notepad beside him. His eyes flicked between the road and the rearview mirror, where the stacked boxes, his quiet mission sat like silent passengers. The city was hushed, its pulse slowed, but something restless stirred beneath its calm skin. The first few turns were familiar. He knew these routes by heart. Alleyways that led to underpasses, broken sidewalks outside shuttered strip malls, tiny parks hidden behind freeway fences. These were the places where hope flickered dimly, where people lived in the in-between, where dignity had to be delivered by hand. But tonight, something was wrong. He spotted it again at the intersection of Laurel and 9th, a patrol car. Headlights off, engine idling. It didn't move as he passed, but the weight of its gaze clung to the back of his neck like breath on. Glass Keanu's grip on the wheel tightened, his pulse ticking a little faster. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:08 p.m., still early in his rounds. Then another cruiser appeared. This one perched at the top of a quiet hill, angled slightly toward the street, its lights low, but its presence unmistakable. He began to connect the dots. This wasn't random. These weren't routine patrols. The city had shifted into a different gear. He slowed as he approached a red light, the quiet hum of his engine the only sound. He kept his head down, movements calm. Behind him, the patrol car eased from its hiding place and began to follow. No sirens, no flashes, just presence. Just pressure. Keanu turned right, then right again, doubling back toward an alternate route he'd used in the past when streets had been cleared or closed. The cruiser mirrored every move, not aggressively, just watching. His jaw tightened. This had happened once before, brief encounter months ago, when officers questioned his presence near a construction site. But back then, the questions had been mild. Tonight. It felt different, coordinated, deliberate. His phone buzzed in the console. A message from one of the volunteers at his charity. Hearing rumors sweeps tonight. Be careful. He stared at the screen, then looked up just as the red and blue flashers ignited behind him. Sharp, sudden, like a blade through silk. His breath caught. The cruiser was signaling him to pull over. He guided the SUV gently to the curb, parking beneath a broken street lamp that flickered like a warning. His hands rested firmly on the wheel, stared straight ahead, heart steady but heavy. The patrol car door opened. Footsteps approached. He heard the crunch of boots on asphalt, the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone trained to stay alert. Officer came into view, a tall man, clean-shaven, early 30s. His uniform was crisp, and his hand rested near his belt, not hostile, but ready. Keanu rolled down the window. "Good evening, sir," the officer said, his voice firm, but not aggressive. "License and registration, please." Keanu nodded, reaching slowly into the glove compartment. "Of course, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop?" The officer accepted the documents and glanced into the back seat. His brows furrowed slightly. "You were driving a bit under the speed limit, unusual for this area. Is everything okay tonight?" Keanu met his eyes. Calm, steady. "I'm delivering supplies. Food, blankets, it's something I do every week." The officer tilted his head slightly, his eyes lingering on the neat stacks of labeled boxes. "Supplies? For who?" Keanu didn't flinch. "For people who need them," the officer said. Nothing for a moment. Then he gestured to the rear of the SUV. "Mind if I take a look?" Before Keanu could answer, another cruiser pulled up behind them. Two more officers stepped out. The first officer didn't wait. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Keanu complied, not because he had to, but because he wanted this to remain calm, controlled, honest. He stepped into the cool air, the scent of distant street food mingling with the low, metallic bite of city tension. He stood quietly as the officers opened the rear door. Their flashlights flicked on, beams slicing through the darkness. They illuminated one box at a time. Blankets, canned goods, medical kits, small envelopes sealed with tape, some marked with names. One officer picked up a note and read it aloud. "Maria, stay safe. Your courage inspires me." Paused. Another officer lifted a first aid kit and studied the contents. Still another opened a small cooler and froze at the sight of labeled medication bottles. "It's her," the first officer said. "Can you explain these?" Keanu nodded. They're donations. Unused medication, provided legally. We work with clinics. Every item here goes to someone I know personally. The officers didn't respond right away. Instead, they moved slowly around the vehicle, inspecting. Every box, every label, every note. The mood shifted from curiosity to tension, and then to something more uncertain. Suspicion brewed not from aggression, but from confusion, from the quiet weight of something they didn't understand. As the flashlight swept over the final box, the officer read aloud the note, "Harold, stay strong. You are not forgotten." His voice softened, barely a whisper. Keanu stood beside the SUV, eyes fixed on the ground, waiting not for permission, but for understanding. Somewhere nearby, a door creaked open. A neighbor peeked from behind curtains. The silence grew denser. Something in the air had changed. The night was no longer just his. It belonged to all of them now. ChatGPT said. The silence between Keanu and the officers stretched thin like a glass surface waiting to shatter. The cool night air clung to his skin, heavier now, laced with the weight of uncertainty. Behind him, the boxes sat open no longer. Just supplies, but evidence under the unforgiving eye of law enforcement. Flashlights danced across the packages like interrogation lights, highlighting the names written in his own hand. Notes meant to be whispered now, laid bare before strangers. A second cruiser pulled in from the far end of the street. Its arrival wasn't announced by sirens, only the hum of its engine and the low murmur of voices over the radio. Another officer stepped out, then another. Their presence multiplied quietly, each uniform adding more gravity to the moment. What began as a single stop now felt like an unfolding operation. Keanu stood still, the gravel beneath his boots grounding him as the tension around him thickened. His breath fogged in the chill, but his eyes remained steady. One of the officers, taller than the rest, with gray streaks at his temple and a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, approached slowly. His name tag? Red Walker. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Reeves," the sergeant said evenly. "You mind telling me what all this is?" Keanu gestured toward the SUV. "Supplies. I collect donations money, goods from people who want to help. I pack them myself. Deliver them weekly. It's mostly to individuals living on the streets. Some are veterans, some are family, some are just invisible to the rest of the city." He raised an eyebrow. "You do this alone?" "Mostly," another officer muttered behind them, holding a sealed prescription bottle between two gloved fingers. "Antibiotics. Labeled. Dates recent. No receipt or paperwork." The sergeant didn't flinch. He looked at Keanu. "Do you have legal clearance to transport this?" Keanu didn't lie. "No paperwork. These are unused, legally donated. Through private clinics and small healthcare providers. I work with a nurse. She makes sure everything's safe." Walker took a long, slow breath, then turned back toward the vehicle. His eyes scanned the labels again. His voice, when he spoke next, was low and deliberate. "You understand what this looks like to us, don't you?" Keanu nodded. "I do. Large quantities. Medical materials. No paperwork. Boxes labeled. Like personal drop shipments. It's unusual." Keanu's jaw tightened. "I understand that, but it's not illegal. And more than that, it's necessary." Walker stared at him for a moment longer, then nodded to one of the officers. "Secure the area. I want to see everything." The third officer moved toward the front of the SUV. Another began photographing the boxes. A fourth spoke quietly into his radio, requesting a supervisor from the city's health division. Keanu watched it all unfold, his breath steady, but a coil of dread tightening inside him. Then, quietly, something shifted. Officer Ramirez, the one who had first pulled him, overwalked to the trunk and opened a package labeled with a child's name, Devon, age 6. Inside were socks, children's coat, 2 protein bars, and a small stuffed bear, gently worn but clean. His hand froze on the toy. Sergeant Ramirez called out, "You need to see this." Walker walked over, looked inside, then paused. His hand reached for a note taped to the bear's chest. "For Devon. I know it's cold, but you're not forgotten. You." He read the words aloud, his voice unexpectedly soft. Keanu didn't move. He didn't speak. He waited. Walker looked at him again, but this time his eyes weren't just assessing. They were searching for intent, for honesty, for truth. "Do you know these people?" Walker asked. "Every one of them," Keanu replied. "Harold sleeps in his car 2 blocks from here. Marie and her kids are under the 12th Street overpass. Devin, ... He's 6. His mom's trying to keep him warm with towels." Walker's mouth tightened. The officer holding the bear looked down, eyes shadowed with something like guilt. Another officer stepped forward. "Sergeant, there's a file folder. In this box looks like lists, ... schedules, ... handwritten profiles." Walker took it, opened it, and flipped through. Names, locations, requests, medical needs. Some notes even listed allergies or preferred brands written in soft, slanted handwriting. "He's not running a charity," one officer said slowly. "This is personal." Keanu's voice was steady. "It's never been about structure. It's about being there, about showing up. You're not just throwing money at a problem from a distance. They need to be seen." The sergeant stood still. The officers around him weren't moving anymore. They were listening. The quiet spread like a fog. Officer Stevens, who had been the most skeptical, lifted another package and found a photo inside a child drawing of a small house with a sun and 2 stick figures. Taped beside it was a note. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. My brother slept warm." His throat tightened as he handed the paper to Walker. The sergeant's brow furrowed. Something behind his eyes cracked. He turned back to Keanu, the silence stretching again, but not from suspicion this time. "This doesn't fall into any official box," Walker said finally. "And that's exactly the problem. Because what you're doing here, ... matters. But it's also right at the edge of what the law understands." Keanu said nothing, didn't plead, he didn't justify. Simply stood in the middle of the dark street, surrounded by flashing lights with truth laid out in boxes around him. Walker looked at his men. Then he spoke quietly, but clearly. "We're not arresting him." Some of the officers looked up in surprise. "We document, we report, but we don't interfere. Not tonight. Not with this." The tension broke, just a little. The cold wind moved through the group like a sigh. But as they stood there, something even more unexpected happened. The body cam. Footage on Officer Ramirez's vest blinked quietly in the dark. Still recording. Within hours it would be shared to the department's server, and within days, ... to the world. But for now, in that quiet corner of the city, under the flicker of a failing street lamp, a man stood beside boxes of hope and, for the first time in a long time, he was finally seen. ChatGPT said. The hours had slipped by without notice. Somewhere beyond the quiet standoff, Los Angeles pulsed on. Unaware that in a forgotten corner of its vast body, something extraordinary had just taken place. The officers stood in a loose circle now, not as enforcers, but as men reflective, quiet, changed. The harsh edge of suspicion had dulled into something more uncertain. Not trust, not yet, but something that resembled recognition. Keanu stood beside his SUV, his silhouette. Long in the headlights, exhaustion tugged at his shoulders, but he remained steady. This was no victory, not yet. Just a moment of fragile reprieve in a system that often punished what it didn't understand. Sergeant Walker rubbed a hand across his jaw and glanced. Back at the boxes. He hadn't moved since telling his men to stand down. The silence between them all had grown heavier, not from threat, but from unspoken truths. It wasn't just the supplies, or the notes, or even the reputation of the man standing before them. It was the realization that they had walked into a moment bigger than any of them had prepared for. "You said you've been doing this how long?" Walker finally asked, his voice low. Keanu looked over. "Almost a year now. Started after I met a guy named Elijah outside a gas station. I brought him food. Next week, he was gone. But he'd left a note under the dumpster. Said thank you for seeing me. That was it. So it started it." Walker nodded. "Slowly? And no one knew?" "Not really. A few volunteers, some donors, But most people wouldn't get it. They'd say I was being reckless or naive. A younger officer, Officer Jennings, quiet until now, stepped closer. Why not? Go through a foundation. There are ways to make this legal, official, structured. Keanu turned to him, not defensive, just real. Because structure slows it down, puts it behind forms and red tape. These people don't have time for that. They need warmth. Food, medicine, tonight, not after a committee meets, not after someone approves a budget. Ramirez, the one who had first pulled him over, stepped forward again. But aren't you afraid that one mistake, one misunderstanding could wreck this whole thing? Keanu didn't hesitate. Every night. But not as afraid as I am of doing nothing. Words landed hard. The officers didn't respond right away. They just stood there, the wind brushing their jackets, the city's distant glow casting halos behind the buildings. Then Walker's radio crackled. Unit 7, report on current stop. He stepped aside and pressed the mic. Unit 7. Still on scene, situation contained, standing by, contained. He looked at Keanu again. We have a problem, he said carefully. What you're doing is good. It's needed. But it sits outside our system. And when something sits outside the system, it's vulnerable, especially now. There are people pushing for cleanup operations. Hard pushes, new ordinances, patrol quotas. Keanu nodded. I've seen it. The sweeps, the fences, the displacements. Walker's jaw tensed. They want to make the problem invisible, not solve it. Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper. But people can't be swept away like trash. The sergeant studied him, then turned to his team. We're not just officers, we're citizens. We wear badges, yeah, but we also have eyes. We see what's out here. And right now, I see someone doing what most won't, what most are afraid to. He turned to the others. No citations, no seizures. We log it, we file it, and we let it go. But the shift wasn't over, because while the officers were putting away flashlights and logging notes, a quiet alert popped up in the precinct. System. A routine server sync had pulled the first 10 minutes of Ramirez's body cam footage. The conversation. The boxers. The handwritten notes. And because of a clerical glitch, it wasn't flagged as confidential. It was already in the cloud. In the hours that followed, it would be accessed by another officer, finishing his shift, Officer Delgado, who quietly ran a public service blog for underfunded outreach programs. He would recognize the name on one of the notes. Maria, a mother. He'd once tried to help months earlier. A mother whose trail had gone cold. Just like that, the footage wouldn't stay quiet. But for now, on the street, Keanu and the officers didn't know. They stood in the kind of silence that comes after storms. Not peaceful, but clear. Something had changed. They all felt it. None could name it yet. Walker approached Keanu, a folded piece of paper in hand. This is my contact. If anything ever happens, if someone tries to shut this down, you call me. We'll find a way. Keanu accepted it with a nod. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Walker replied. This isn't over. If this gets attention, real attention, there will be people who won't like it, who want it shut down. The city doesn't always reward the quiet ones. Keanu smiled faintly. I'm not doing it for rewards. Good, the sergeant said. It's because they might try to make you pay for it anyway. The wind picked up, brushing through the alley like a whisper of the future. Far off, a train rolled past, its horn low and mournful. The officers began returning to their vehicles. The flashing lights dimmed. The street emptied. Keanu remained still, his SUV still packed, his list of stops not yet finished. The night had shifted, yes, but the work was not done. He climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced at the clock. 12:46 a.m. in his mirror. The last cruiser turned the corner and disappeared. He pulled away from the curb, back into the city's maze of forgotten lives. He still had 4 names left, for reasons to keep going. And somewhere above, in an office downtown, a video began to buffer. The footage didn't go viral at first. It lingered quietly on the precinct server, like a candle flickering in a locked room unnoticed, uncelebrated. Officer Delgado found it near dawn, bleary-eyed at the tail end of a double shift. Been searching the system for unrelated footage when he clicked play out of habit? The screen filled with darkness. Headlights. Calm voice. Keanu's voice, explaining what each box was, who it was for, and why it mattered. Delgado didn't blink for nearly 5 minutes. By the time the footage ended, he had tears in his eyes and one hand pressed over his mouth. He recognized not just Keanu, but the names. He'd served eviction notices to some of those families, his hands shaking while they packed their lives into shopping carts. He remembered Maria. Girl. The blanket she'd tried to sew from torn sweatshirts, without overthinking it. He uploaded a short clip to his blog anonymous. No precinct tags, just the title. If only more people did this. By morning, it had reached a few thousand views. By lunch, 1 million. But Keanu didn't know any of that yet. He was parked beside an abandoned gas station off Crenshaw, sitting behind the wheel with his head resting against the window. The night had been long. The conversation with the officers still echoed in his mind, especially Walker's last words. They might try to make you pay for this. He looked down at the folded list in his hand. 3 names left. Next was Tomasa, retired history. Teacher who'd lost his home after a fraudulent mortgage scheme took everything? Keanu had found him months ago, sleeping behind a billboard downtown. Instead of asking for food, Tomas had asked if Keanu could bring books. Keanu reached behind him and grabbed the package. Inside, 2 blankets, a copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and a note that simply said, Tomas, your mind still matters. The world still needs it. He pulled back onto the road, unaware that traffic patterns were already shifting. Unaware that downtown, a crowd had begun to gather outside the precinct holding candles, signs, and printed screenshots from the video. Unaware that hashtag Keep 'em Going had already started trending worldwide. Unaware that news anchors were scrambling for statements that journalists were calling every outreach program in Los Angeles to ask if they'd ever worked with Keanu Reeves. He only knew the road, but it didn't stay silent for long. Just as he turned off Fairfax, black SUV swerved. Behind him, flashing its brights, no sirens. No decals. Unmarked, Keanu frowned. Another appeared in front of him, boxing him in near an alley between 2 graffiti-covered buildings. Both vehicles stopped. Men stepped out, civilian clothes, dark jackets, short buzz cuts, earpieces. Not police, not pressed. They approached with practiced calm. Keanu didn't panic. He parked the SUV, stepped out slowly and waited. One of them, tall and expressionless, spoke. Mr. Reeves, we need a word. Who are you? City Public Safety Liaison, technically, but unofficially, we're the people who deal with fires before they spread. Keanu tilted his head. You think I'm a fire? We think you're a fuse. He glanced at the boxers in the back seat, then back at them. These are just blankets. Food. Medicine. The tall man stepped forward. Not anymore. They're headlines now, symbols, and you've become the story. So the city doesn't like stories it didn't write? The moment stretched, another man stepped in. Softer tone. Look, we're not here to threaten you. Just advising. Footage is out. People are watching. If you continue these deliveries now, it looks like defiance. Like you're leading a movement. I'm not, Keanu said calmly. I'm just trying to help people who are cold. And that's exactly the problem, the taller man said. 'Cause helping people shouldn't make you a threat, but it does. At least to some people. Developers, investors, people who think your little project shines a light in places they'd rather keep dark. Keanu crossed his arms. So what now? You want me to stop? They didn't answer directly. The softer one said, just consider stepping back. Let a nonprofit take over. Something safer, official, cleaner. We'll help set it up. No drama. No soul either, Keanu replied. The men exchanged a look. Then the tall one leaned in and said, voice low, you're famous, Mr. Reeves. That cuts both ways. Keep going. And it won't just be you on the line. Cameras will come. Headlines. Maybe backlash. Maybe smear campaigns. Let them come. Keanu said. I've had worse things said about me for less. The man paused, then gave a single nod. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. They left without another word. Disappearing into their unmarked cars like ghosts in the fog, Keanu stood in the alley. Heart calm, eyes clear. For the first time, he realized this was no longer about deliveries. Not just about blankets or food. This was something bigger now. It was no longer a secret. He looked down at the package in his hands. Thomas's name, scribbled on top and whispered under his breath, "We're not done." Got back in. The SUV turned the key and drove on. ChatGPT said, the wind swept through the alley behind him, swirling leaves across the asphalt like whispers chasing a secret. Keanu didn't look back as the unmarked SUVs faded into the city's veins. Their message was clear. This wasn't just a quiet act of compassion anymore. It was a disruption. And he was no longer just a man delivering supplies. He was becoming a mirror. And people in power didn't like mirrors. They preferred shadows. He gripped the steering wheel, the note for Tomas, still resting in the passenger seat like a promise. His knuckles whitened briefly, not from fear, but resolve. He had felt pressure before. He had survived storms the world never saw. This one would not break him. But as he turned onto the avenue, his phone buzzed violently against the dashboard. Unknown number, he let it ring. It buzzed again, then again. On the fourth call, he answered. A woman's voice clear, clipped, professional. Mr. Reeves, I represent the mayor's office. We'd appreciate your cooperation.
In what? In avoiding unnecessary headlines.
Your presence at these encampments is now considered volatile. You're unintentionally inciting crowds. Keanu exhaled through his nose. I haven't told a soul where I go. If crowds are forming, it's not because of me. Be that as it may, she continued, there's now risk. Perception becomes reality. We ask that you discontinue your deliveries at least temporarily. Allow certified groups to handle this with proper oversight. He glanced in the rear view. A sedan had been following him for the last 6 blocks. Dark windows. No plates. You're tracking me? Mr. Reeves, she said evenly. You're not the enemy. But you are becoming unpredictable. That makes people nervous. Good, he said, and hung up. Keanu turned off his phone. He took a sharp right, then a sudden left down a service road he knew wasn't on any GPS. He'd learned the backbones of this city through long nights and broken detours. He knew where the signal dropped and where the light didn't reach. He parked behind a crumbling textile warehouse, one of Tomas's usual spots. But the alley was empty. Keanu frowned. He stepped out, holding the box, scanning the dark for signs of life. Nothing. Then from a stack of pallets, a weak cough. He moved closer. Tomas. A figure shifted, emerging slowly. Frail, beard overgrown, eyes tired but alert. You're late, Tomas rasped, but he was smiling. Keanu crouched beside him and handed him the box. I brought what you asked for, and something extra. Tomas opened it slowly. When he saw the book, his fingers trembled. You remembered, always. But their moment didn't last. A voice shouted from the far side of the alley. Step away from him. Hands where we can see them. Keanu turned to private security guards, not police. Tactical vests. Flashlights blinding. He's trespassing. One barked. This is restricted property. Keanu shielded Tomas and raised his hand. He's just resting. He's not hurting anyone. Doesn't matter. Owner filed injunctions against loiterers. We're clearing this area tonight. Keanu stepped forward, voice calm but firm. He has nowhere else to go. Not our problem. The second guard raised a stun baton. Keanu didn't flinch. You touch him, and you answer for it. A long pause. Tension like a wire pulled tight. Then a new voice broke through the tension. Stand down. Officer Ramirez emerged from the shadows, uniform still on. Alone. This man is under no arrest, he said, flashing his badge. And this property is within city jurisdiction until 5 a.m. You're early. The guards hesitated, then backed off, muttering under their breath. Keanu looked at Ramirez, surprised. How did you find me? Ramirez nodded toward his chest. Your story is out. The footage, the deliveries. It's everywhere. I figured you'd come here next. I figured you'd need someone to watch your back. Keanu didn't speak. He just offered a quiet nod of thanks. Damas clutched the book to his chest. The world's changing, huh? Keanu looked at the skyline, the red glow of news choppers already spinning over the city. Maybe, he said softly. Or maybe it's just waking up. Ramirez looked at him. You're not safe anymore. They'll come harder now. Then I'll go deeper, alone. Keanu paused. I was never alone, he said, not really. I just didn't know how many others were waiting for someone to take the first step. A gust of wind swept through the alley. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, but this time, they weren't for him. Officer Ramirez looked at the boxes still in the SUV. Let me help you deliver the rest. Mayanu smiled, the first real one all night. He handed Ramirez a box labeled Roso's, 11 years old, loves oranges. Together, they walked into the dark. But the darkness wasn't winning anymore. Keanu and Officer Ramirez moved through the city like quiet ghosts. Their SUV coasting between concrete arteries that pulsed with fear, hope, and something a new attention. The city no longer slept. News vans prowled the blocks like predators. Swarming anywhere, a signal pinged a story. Helicopters buzzed overhead, and below, communities stirred. Hands reached from tents, from alleyways, from corners where dignity had once been a memory. All of them had seen the footage now. Keanu Reeves, bent over boxes, whispering names. Holding notes like sacred scripture, he had become a symbol, and symbols made people nervous. Each. Delivery that night became more than a dit, became an act of defiance. At Rose's location, a group of children surrounded the SUV like a miracle had just parked in their lives. Ramirez, holding a box filled with oranges and socks, crouched to meet their wide-eyed wonder. Keanu knelt beside Rosa herself, her hands trembling as she clutched the note he'd written days earlier, but memorized now by heart. I heard them say you were just an actor, she said quietly. Keanu smiled. That's true. But you're more than that now, huh? He looked her in the eyes. No, I'm still just someone trying. Rosa didn't blink. That's what makes you more. She hugged him, and something in him, something long held and deeply buried and locked. But their work wasn't done. They moved to the last stop, a tight cluster of tarps behind a shuttered music store. The man there, Levi, was a former street violinist who lost his hearing in an explosion 2 years ago. Keanu didn't bring him words. He brought him gloves and a silent promise. But as they turned to leave, the alley filled with floodlights. Half. A dozen black SUVs rolled in, blocking both ends of the street. They came quietly, no sirens. No orders barked. This wasn't law enforcement. It was something colder, coordinated, polished. A woman stepped out first. Dark blue suit, silver badge hanging at her hip, but not local PD. She carried a tablet, not a gun. Behind her, men in dark jackets fanned. Out, flanking the alley like chess pieces. Mr. Reeves, she called. My name is Elena Frost. I represent the Federal Urban Safety Council. Ramirez stepped between them. He's done nothing wrong. You're not being charged. Frost said, but you are being summoned. There are hearings scheduled. This has become a national conversation. Keanu stepped forward. Conversation about what? Liability? Public disruption? Authorized aid under emergency codes? You've triggered inquiries in 3 states. Senators are calling. Your name is attached to a shadow aid network we can't control. He stared at her. I'm not a network. You are now. She handed him a printed document. Thick. Official. You have 2 choices, Frost continued. Step down publicly. Turn over your list, your donors, your volunteers. Allow a sanctioned agency to absorb your model. We'll praise your intent, protect your reputation. Keanu's jaw clenched. And the other choice? Keep going. But you'll do it while being audited, investigated, and potentially blocked in every major city. Your name will be dragged through every political angle until the people you're trying to help become footnotes in a fight they never asked for. Ramirez stepped forward again, anger flaring. He's saving lives. I believe that, Frost said. But the machine doesn't. The machine sees metrics, not men. The air felt cold then. Not from the weather, but from the chill of bureaucracy, with no face and no heart. Keanu looked down at the papers. Then he looked up at the gathered crowd, homeless men and women who had emerged from the shadows. Levi, Rosa, Tomas, Harold, Maria, all standing silently now. Some in blankets he'd given them, some holding notes he had written with his own hand. He looked at Ramirez, then at Frost, and he dropped the papers to the ground. "You want a story?" he said, voice quiet but unbreakable. "Here's one. A man sees suffering. He helps. No cameras. No speeches, just care. If that becomes a threat, then maybe it's the system that needs to change, not the man." Frost didn't blink. "You understand the consequences?" "I do," Keanu said, "and I'll carry them, just like I carry every box." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Officer Ramirez stepped beside him. "Then so will I." Another officer emerged from the crowd, Stevens, then Jennings, then Delgado. One by one, officers stepped forward and stood with Keanu, not as enforcers. As humans, the press arrived seconds later, tipped by someone unseen. Cameras clicked, microphones extended. Questions flew. Keanu said only one thing: "If the world wants to watch, then let them see this." He turned back to the SUV, picked up another box labeled for the one who thought no one would come, and handed it to a young girl sobbing in disbelief. The next day, the footage of that moment shattered every record online. By sundown, over 30 million people had seen it. By the end of the week, cities across America began to reconsider their codes on direct aid. 1 month later, a coalition of officers, outreach workers, and volunteers led by Keanu and backed by a grassroots surge formed a new foundation, Project UNFORGOTT, and operated on one principle: no permission is needed to care. Keanu never stopped delivering, not because it was easy, but because the quiet ones had found their voice, and the world finally was listening.